if you want to break with these imperialist forces, it's simple. We denounce the agreements. Everything starts from there. I think the example of Chad in any case is tangible. They started by denouncing the agreements. Otherwise, if we don't denounce the agreements, just saying that the bases leave, we haven't done anything. Because the problem lies in the colonial agreements, the defenses that have been signed since independence. The most dangerous is not the one you see in the bases. The most dangerous are the military advisors. Military advisors exist in all these countries. They existed in Burkina as well until the end of 2022, until we took responsibility. And who are these military advisors? They are the ones who are supposed to implement France's policy here.
The night air over Ouagadougou felt unnaturally still, as if the entire Sahel were holding its breath. Inside the National Command Center, a place known publicly only by rumors, Burkina Faso's leader stood before a table scattered with classified documents, satellite images, and intercepted communications. His commanders watched him silently. They had seen him determined, seen him furious, seen him resolute. But tonight, he looked like a man carrying the weight of centuries of African struggle on his shoulders. The evidence lay before him like the shattered pieces of a broken mirror, each shard reflecting a hidden betrayal. Covert messaging between Western operatives, coded orders instructing local collaborators to sabotage military convoys, bribes wired through shell organizations, attempts to stir ethnic conflict along borders, and detailed plans to fracture the new Sahel Alliance before it could become an uncontrollable force. The leader took a breath. "It is time," he said, voice calm but electric. "Tonight, we show Africa the truth. Tonight, we expose the storm that has been gathering above us." His generals exchanged glances. They understood the risk. Such a revelation could destabilize the entire region, trigger retaliation, or provoke global panic. But they also understood something else. Africa had been silent for too long. Outside, Ouagadougou's streets vibrated with life. The people sensed change coming. Radio chatter buzzed with rumors, social media with anticipation. From Bamako to Niamey, whispers traveled like desert winds. Something massive was about to erupt. When the leader walked toward the broadcasting hall, hundreds of soldiers lined the corridor, fists placed across their chests. No one spoke. No one blinked. They knew history was about to turn. The cameras switched on. Light flooded his face. Across the continent, screens in crowded living rooms, dusty market stalls, military barracks, and presidential palaces flickered to life. Africa watched. He began with no preamble, no grand flourish. Only truth delivered with the force of a desert storm. "For months," he said, "we have been warned that the Sahel Alliance poses a threat, not to Africa, but to those who have enjoyed uninterrupted influence in our lands. We have been told to fear unity, to fear sovereignty, to fear ourselves." He lifted a document. The camera zoomed in. Every African viewer leaned closer. "But tonight," he continued, "I will show you what we were never meant to see." He revealed dossiers containing intercepted messages from Western intelligence cells operating inside the Alliance's territory. Translated transcripts appeared on the screen. Orders to destabilize supply routes, instructions to bribe local leaders, plans to discredit the Sahel Alliance as a rogue coalition. A second file appeared, satellite photos of captured equipment buried along the borders, marked with serial numbers that traced back to military suppliers in Europe and North America. Then came the most explosive moment. He displayed the faces of 3 covert operatives recently arrested near the tri-border zone. Their forged identities had collapsed under interrogation. Their mission had been explicit: infiltrate alliance meetings, gather intelligence, and prepare the ground for political fractures. The continent erupted. In Dakar, people poured into the streets, waving flags and chanting in disbelief and triumph. In Lagos, university students blasted the speech through megaphones, shouting that Africa had been vindicated. In Bamako and Niamey, gun salutes echoed through military bases. Crowds climbed onto rooftops, cheering the Sahel Alliance with a fervor unseen since independence movements. But the West reacted with absolute fury. In Washington, emergency meetings unfolded in locked rooms beneath the Capitol. Generals leaned over maps, Analysts compared timestamps. Diplomats issued statements calling the accusations fabricated. The U.S. president held a closed-door briefing, his advisors arguing about whether this exposure would destabilize Western influence in the entire region. In London, ministers exchanged panicked glances as they watched footage of the broadcasts. If Africa believes this, one said, we lose a continent. In Paris, things were far worse. The revelations hit like a thunderclap. Media anchors struggled to counter the narrative, scrambling to discredit the evidence. Analysts whispered about a possible intelligence failure so severe it could reshape Europe's geopolitical standing. Asia and Russia reacted differently. Their governments moved quickly, calculating opportunities. Special envoys drafted new proposals to engage with the Sahel Alliance. Economic, military, technological partnerships suddenly became priorities. They recognized a rising power and prepared to reposition themselves accordingly. Back in Africa, the wave of unity surged. Leaders from Mali and Niger called the Burkina Faso leader within minutes. Their voices crackled through encrypted lines, carrying the emotions of warriors who had fought too long against unseen hands. You have ignited the continent, said Mali's defense chief. Every African child will remember this night. Let the West deny it, said Niger's leader. We have lived this truth. The Sahel Alliance announced an emergency summit to discuss the revelations. Delegates traveled under heavy security, their convoys slicing across the desert in long, determined lines. Before dawn, new protests erupted in cities across the continent. People marched with banners reading Africa will not kneel. The Sahel is our shield, and we stand with Burkina Faso. Something new had awakened. But Western capitals were not retreating, they were strategizing. In Brussels, European envoys drafted sanctions proposals. Some wanted to target key industries. Others pushed for stricter travel bans. But not all agreed. Many feared sanctions would accelerate Africa's realignment away from the West. In Washington, intelligence agencies initiated containment planning. Satellite monitoring of the Sahel increased. Troop deployments were quietly repositioned in nearby states. Media houses received unofficial guidance to push narratives painting the Sahel Alliance as dangerously radical. A media war had begun. Back in Ouagadougou, international journalists crowded outside the government palace, desperate for reactions. But the leader ignored the noise. He gathered his commanders inside the war room. On the screen, a classified assessment outlined the risk of retaliation, cyber attacks, drone surveillance, attempts to influence local politicians, covert destabilization operations. The generals expected these. But the leader pointed to another line, African unity rising. This, he said, is what they fear most. Not our weapons, not our armies, our unity. In Bamako, crowds outside the presidential compound chanted the leader's name. In Niamey, people lit torches and marched through the streets. Across the continent, artists painted murals of the Sahel Alliance lifting Africa from the chains of interference. But something darker was brewing. 3 days after the broadcast, a convoy transporting alliance documents was ambushed near the border. The attackers vanished into the night, leaving behind burned vehicles and encrypted communication devices of foreign design. Analysts in Burkina Faso traced the signals to a remote outpost linked to Western-backed contractors. The leader stared at the evidence. He felt the familiar heat of anger rising. They were not backing down. They were doubling their efforts. He summoned the Sahel Alliance Council to Ouagadougou. The leaders sat around an enormous wooden table carved with symbols of ancient kingdoms: Mali, Mossi, Songhai, Kanem-Bornu. It was a reminder that African sovereignty was not new. It was returning. The Burkina Faso leader addressed them. We are under attack because we dared to stand together. They fear what we are becoming, a sovereign force that cannot be controlled. But we will not bow. We will reveal every operation, every lie, every attempt to weaken us. He paused, then revealed a final piece of intelligence, a set of encrypted messages between Western officials planning to support a political faction inside the Sahel to fracture the alliance from within. The room fell silent. This, he said, is their plan. Mali's leader slammed his fist on the table. Then let us show them Africa has changed. Niger's head of intelligence leaned forward. We must expose everything. If we reveal these messages, the world will know the truth. The Burkina Faso leader nodded slowly. He had already made the decision. 2 days later, he stepped onto a global stage again. This time, the world was watching not only out of curiosity, but out of fear. He began with calm intensity. Africa has endured centuries of interference. But today, we draw a line. Today, we show the world that the Sahel is not a battleground. It is the birthplace of a new African order. He revealed the encrypted communications. They contained explicit plans to manipulate political outcomes, support opposition groups, and derail the Sahel Alliance's unity. Western capitals exploded with outrage. Diplomats called for emergency hearings. Legislators demanded explanations. Intelligence officials went into damage control mode. But ordinary citizens in Africa were no longer listening to Western counternarratives. They believed what they could see. Crowds in Accra blocked streets in solidarity. Citizens in Johannesburg held huge rallies. In Kenya, activists organized teach-ins on Western interference in Africa. In Egypt and Algeria, analysts debated the implications of a rising Sahel power. For the first time in decades, Africa was speaking with one voice. And the world trembled. But Burkina Faso's leader wasn't done. He announced that several foreign agents had been expelled. Their captured equipment would be displayed for the world to see. Encrypted radios, drones, surveillance devices, forged currency, each piece a symbol of manipulation. Global news outlets screamed with sensational headlines. Commentators argued about whether the Sahel Alliance had gone too far or not far enough. Inside the African Union headquarters, debates erupted about whether to formally recognize the alliance as the continent's new security anchor. Some nations hesitated, afraid of angering Western partners. Others urged immediate endorsement. The leader knew this was the turning point. Meanwhile, in Washington, officials discussed sanctioning the alliance. Some argued for cutting military aid. Others wanted to freeze financial assets. But there was a deep, unspoken fear. If sanctions were imposed, Africa might unite even more strongly against the West. In Europe, anxiety spread through diplomatic ranks. Economists warned that alienating the Sahel could disrupt energy pipelines, raw materials, and migration agreements. Military analysts warned that the Sahel was becoming a strategic black hole where Western influence could no longer operate reliably. In Asia, governments saw an opening. They began drafting partnership proposals, energy development, infrastructure projects, satellite networks, and regional defense agreements. And in Moscow, officials smiled quietly. They had predicted this shift. Now they watched it unfold, preparing their own strategic moves. But the Sahel Alliance was not blind. It knew that new alliances came with new risks. Power vacuums attract influence from all directions. The Burkinabe leaders' advisors urged caution. Everyone wants to be our friend now, one said. But not all want Africa to rise. Some only want to replace those who failed. The leader nodded. We choose based on respect, not desperation. As tensions escalated, cyber attacks targeted key government facilities in the Sahel. Power outages swept through certain regions. Disinformation campaigns flooded social media, accusing the alliance of fabricating evidence. But digital investigators traced the attacks back to foreign sources connected to intelligence networks. The Sahel Alliance responded by forming a joint cybersecurity task force, the first of its kind in the region. It drew praise from some nations and criticism from Western analysts who claimed it was too militarized. But Africa celebrated. For once, the continent was defending itself with strategy, unity, and innovation. Weeks passed. The world shifted. Western embassies reduced staff across Sahel countries. International NGOs suddenly announced temporary suspensions. Foreign media coverage turned increasingly hostile, portraying the alliance as dangerously independent. Yet African nations poured support into the Sahel. Trade deals were negotiated. Joint military exercises were scheduled. Transport corridors were planned. The alliance began looking like the core of a new geopolitical axis, an African axis. But the real storm was still coming. Late one night, the Burkinabe leader received an encrypted message from a trusted intelligence officer. Its urgency froze him in place. We've intercepted something, the officer said when he arrived. Something big. He handed over a classified file. Inside were communications between Western officials discussing a coordinated effort to undermine upcoming elections in a neighboring state, hoping to install a government hostile to the Sahel Alliance. It was the most explosive discovery yet, proof of a full-scale political intervention plan. The leader felt the world tilt. If he released this information, global fallout would reach a level no one could predict. It could trigger diplomatic ruptures, sanctions, military escalations. It could shake Africa and the world. He looked at his commanders. They waited, breath held, knowing the decision he made next could shape Africa's fate for generations. Finally, he spoke quietly. "The world believes the fallout has begun," he said, "but they have seen nothing yet." He closed the file. "We expose everything." Outside, the night wind swept across the Sahel, carrying the scent of dust and revolution. The continent waited, and somewhere, far beyond Africa, powerful nations braced for what they feared most: the rise of a united African superbloc. The next revelation would change everything: alliances, global power structures, and the future of Africa's role in the world. And when it came, the world would not be ready. The cliffhanger hung like a storm cloud over the planet. The Sahel had awakened, and the world would soon learn what that truly meant.